I am JJ Perez from Inside Runner Sports. That is Greg Luca from the San Antonio Express News. And we are here to recap UTSA's huge win over Tulane this past Thursday night, Greg. A few days removed from what is one of the biggest wins in the Jeff Traylor era for the Roadrunners. I was marginally shocked with the way that one played out.
Well, I think we thought based on UTSA's home record, I think what's it 24-0 now against
Yeah.
conference opponents in the Alamo Dome, that this had a lot of things in common with the Memphis game last year, where they were down coming into that game at 3-5 against a team that was getting top 25 votes, wearing the blackout jerseys
Yeah.
for a night game at home. And it was all the same this year, 3-4 record. Tulane's getting top 25 votes and they have their black jerseys back again. And so you see the same kind of result play out. And this one was pretty dominant in a lot of ways, especially on the offensive side. I think we have to talk mostly about Owen McCown, just kind of the performance that he put together after some low moments this year and wondering what was missing for him to perform at the level he did last season. And it sounds like it was, as we had sort of speculated, that there was an injury situation that they were trying to keep under wraps. And now that it's better, they're a little more open to talking about it. But I think that was where we have to kind of start with this game, is just what he was able to bring to the table and how impressive he looked.
Yep. Let's jump right there. Owen was as perfect as anybody could be. He had two incompletions, 31 for 33, season high in offensive productions, in yardage for the offense, and just overall looked incredibly sharp. I asked Jeff Traylor today if he's ever seen a quarterback that hot. I think he said no, but I don't know that I've ever seen an in-person performance like that. He was literally in the zone. His two throwaways were a drop and or his two incompletions were a drop and a throwaway. And this guy was just, I mean, remarkable. And I don't know if, based on what we've seen this season, anyone could have expected that.
Yeah, and he didn't have to do a ton out of the ordinary from what they're usually trying to run. It was just very efficient. I mean, the first pass of the game, he found, I think it was Overmeyer deep down the middle for like 40 yards, and he had one other to McEwen up the sideline on kind of like a kind of leaking up on a sort of route that goes up the sideline there straight down the field. And those, I think, were the only two real downfield throws he had to make that were like more than 20 yards, which is something we've been kind of tracking this season. But he was able to be incredibly efficient with a lot of the underneath stuff and getting the guys in position to run after the catch. And it was just funny. There was that one screen pass that Robert Henry had to make the jumping one-handed catch and kind of bailed out his perfect day. But other than that, it felt like everything he wanted to throw was exactly where you would have wanted it. And he didn't make the receivers have to work very hard either.
The TV broadcast alluded to a groin and a shoulder injury. I don't know that we caught that live. I mean, obviously we didn't know what was going on with Owen. You could just tell he didn't seem right throughout this first half of the season. And coming off this second bye week, I think this is as sharp as we've ever seen it, and you have to assume he's as close to 100% as possible.
Yeah, he was. It just seemed like in some of these earlier games that he was kind of shying away from contact, which I don't think is necessarily in character for him. And so that's why my gut was to say that there's something wrong with him physically, especially because we just couldn't come up with any other reason with how much continuity there was on offense, why the production wasn't at a much higher level to even match last year, much less exceed it, which would have been something that would have been pretty reasonable to expect coming into the year. So I think that now we're seeing not only what he's capable of when he's fully healthy, but you have Devin McEwen seems like he's back to full health. David Amador looks like he might be back to full health. I know Amador had by far his best game after a pretty quiet season to this point. I don't know if it was McEwen's best game, but if not, it was close. And so I think that both of those guys being back fully healthy allows them to all three practice more in sync. Although I know Jeff told us this morning that Owen didn't really practice much aside from some mental stuff last week. So they didn't necessarily need that to have the level of production they had, but it'll certainly help going forward if those guys are back in there getting, 11 on 11 reps more regularly.
I mean, to me, it just goes to show, and not to discount anybody else's performance on the offense, because there were some very good performances. But at this level, your offense is going to go as your quarterback goes for the most part, right? And you mentioned it. We saw a monster game from Amador. He threw his first completion, which was a touchdown, and I guess he's been battling turf toe since the beginning of the year, and just a dynamic weapon with him and McEwen. Those two wide receivers seem to be like a pretty good 1-2 punch for Owen to find there.
And when it starts to click, you see everything else kind of open up. I mean, we saw the tight ends start to get pretty involved in this game, especially in the first half. And then just UTSA's willingness to go into their bag of trick plays and pull out some gadgets and stuff like that, like the pass to Amador or the pass from Amador that you mentioned being his first career touchdown. And he had completed one pass, I think it was either last year or 2 years ago, but we've seen them try to set up that play so many times. I was surprised that it hadn't happened more often. I guess usually he ends up just pulling it down or it's not there, but that's something that they've tried to go to before. And when everything else in the offense is clicking, then they're able to pull out stuff like that for these explosive plays that they might not be able to find other ways. And it's just interesting because there's been times where it felt like they were taking too many 2, 3, or 4 yard gains, and then if they messed up one time, now you're punting. But in a game like this where the quarterback goes 31 for 33, you can take all the 4 yard gains if you want if it's 100% success rate. So they were able to kind of dink and dunk down the field in stretches, and it allowed them to open up for some bigger hits when they needed to.
They even had a screenplay there that hit for a touchdown, kind of in the middle there. That was pretty interesting. I don't think we could not talk about the defense
Oh, sure.
just because how well they did. I think there was a 31 straight unanswered points by UTSA, and a big part of that was because the defense was able to get off the field and create some turnovers.
Yeah, I think it was more the turnovers than like a down to down success. And, when you force a fumble, that was obviously going to be a 50-50 whether they jump on it. And it felt like in the past, they just hadn't been able to jump on them. And this one, they got on top of it. The interception from Ahmad Chapman was the one that stood out to me because I think the other turnovers were kind of later in the game after maybe it got a little bit more desperate. But, Ahmad Chapman made a great play on that ball. And we should talk about he made his debut the game before this one. And then he played in this game and he's got a couple more left to still be able to preserve a red shirt. But he's a guy who came in when the roster was kind of already solidified outside of that in I guess it was early August with training camp already underway and just has sort of worked his way into a role in this cornerback rotation where we've talked about how shallow that room is. We saw Zach Morris come back, but at the same time, Davin Martin and Jacavian Rodgers are hurt. And I don't know if it's having certain guys back or the skill sets of those guys, but it looked to me like in kind of base down standard situations, UTSA was playing a lot more man-to-man coverage than we've seen earlier in the year. And it might just be that Chapman's good at that. But like the play in particular where he got the interception, I could be seeing it wrong, but it looked like he was just kind of tracking that receiver and then was able to cut in front of him over that deep route down the middle of the field. So it looked like more often they were willing to go to that sort of coverage look than they have been previously. And just whether that's going to be good or not in most matchups, it's just nice to have that option, to feel like you can not have to play zone because you might not have the confidence in your corners to man up one-on-one. So it'll be interesting to see what that group looks like once they have Davin Martin and Jacavian Rodgers healthy on top of Chapman and Morris, because we have seen them play like maybe three guys at a time this year, where you would think you could cycle through five or six if you really wanted to.
The Roadrunners play spoiler to a pretty good Tulane team, maybe a team that was on the outside of the CFP spot. I think Jeff Traylor and the Roadrunners entered this one with a little bit of chip on their shoulder. I think they probably took what was said pregame by the Tulane coach and the Tulane quarterback a little bit more serious than I think I did, right? I didn't even know, to be quite honest, what the Tulane quarterback said because it was, you know, in pregame and we're pretty busy during that time. So for them to come out and say they felt sort of disrespected for that, I was kind of surprised, but it does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I had to track that one down after the game. Luckily, ESPN puts all the replays up there on the site. So I pulled up the pregame show and just clicked through it. And I didn't know they did that, where it's pregame and he's just doing like not the full warm-ups, but like the pre-warm-ups. He's just out there kind of tossing the ball around and doing an interview at the same time. And I guess felt pretty comfortable just kind of letting it fly that, he had won in the Alamo Dome and was going to make it 2-0. Something's got to give and it's not going to be me. And he expects to dominate and all that stuff. And obviously that somebody on UTSA staff got wind of that and they shared it with the players as quickly as they could. And who knows if that stuff has an impact or not. We were asking the defensive guys after the game and they said, listen, we missed 37 tackles and we got blown out and we had plenty to prove without the other team's quarterback on the field saying whatever he's going to say. So there was plenty of reasons that they felt motivated, it sounded like, for this one. And good on the coaching staff and Jeff Traylor in particular for kind of using that to get a little extra juice out of the guys. But like I mentioned, there is just a lot of things that could be driving them at this point. And they mentioned, Jeff mentioned the fair weather fans and the spoiled media and all that stuff. So there's just a lot of things that were kind of driving these guys. And that's just sort of what happens when you start with a losing record, when you're expecting to have a better season than that.
Yeah, Tulane did replace the quarterback in the third quarter, so for whatever that's worth, and as much as there was all this chatter about the crowd noise, we saw a smaller crowd but a loud crowd, and Jeff made it a point that he sent his GM over to tell the band to crank it up a little bit because he was worried they were going to be impacted by that. But, I think when you take a step back and see where this season has gone, I don't think it's kind of, you know, dramatic to say that this win may have saved this 2025 season because of what it could mean for the team moving forward.
Yeah, and it's nice to know that UTSA can still jump up and beat an elite team, especially at home in a moment like that, where again, if you lose that game now you're 3-5, and then you have to go to South Florida, which could very easily become 3-6. And then even if you win out, you're just barely getting bowl eligibility and you haven't beaten a team of one of the top caliber that shows you that
Right.
you have that potential, whether it's for this year or in future years. And so I think that this was certainly a huge moment for them. And we kind of highlighted that coming into the game. I remember somebody asked me before North Texas, like, is this game a must win? And I said, not really, but if you lose that one, then Tulane kind of becomes a must win because at that point it's going to be hard to get anything that you can hang your hat on for this season. And they pulled that off in this one. So however the rest of the year plays out, I mean, certainly this inspires some optimism that especially those last three games, if not next week at South Florida, that those last three games are a little more winnable. And if they come out of this year, 8-5 with the bowl win or whatever it is, there's going to be a path to a season that people feel good about, which did not always seem like it was the case through these first seven games.
I will say the way they won, right? I think in the losses previous to this, we would say it's not just that they lost, it's how they looked while they lost. Now, if you flip that around, just the offense being able to perform at such a high level, obviously you're not going to have that every week, but you have that capability, and that has to instill some confidence in the team moving forward, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they should be confident on offense because we can't come up with the reason it wasn't like this all season. This shouldn't have been an anomaly. This should be what it has looked like from week one. And there's been flashes of it, quarters, drives, four straight games they open the game with a scoring drive for a touchdown. And so they have proven that they can put drives together, and now they've proven they can put a whole game together. And so I think, yeah, they should be confident that they can continue to produce at this level going forward.
Jeff Traylor won his 50th game as UTSA head coach. Pretty monumental moment there for him. Post game, he decided to use the moment to try and rally his troops to get more support for his program. What did you think of that moment? And I think it's received mixed reviews from some of the fans. I do think it has kind of spurred some support as well. I don't know that we'll see any of that in the short term, but what do you think of those comments in that move?
Yeah, it's not necessarily stuff that we haven't heard before, but he's very selective, smartly about doing it when the team is playing well or after a win like that, because it's just going to be easier to receive. And so I think he's entirely right. The expectation that UTSA is going to be contending for championships every year is based on what they did in an easier league. And even then, unless they
You
had the
you
resources and
you
to
barely
back it
got
up,
there too. You barely
right?
got
So
into that other league.
it was sort of accepted and I think accurate that UTSA was near the top of Conference USA in terms of resources and how it shaked out, and we saw that play out on the field. And now in the American, that's not the way it is, but people still expect that to be a team that contends for championships. A, because they were in the mix their first year, and at times last year looked like a team that could play at that level. And so this year there was still expectations that they might be able to do that. Especially last season, they didn't shy away from expectations that they could be one of the elite teams in the G5. And so I think that there's a lot of reasons why fans have built up those expectations, but to Trailer's point, unless you are fielding a roster that is funded to the level of your USF and your Memphis and your Tulane, which to all indications UTSA is not, that there's a significant gap there, then it's just hard to put it on on the players and on the coaches to be as good as those teams week in and week out. And just because they showed it against Tulane one time doesn't mean that every week is going to be like this unless there's a greater commitment. In fact, it's probably more likely that future seasons will look like the first half of this year unless UTSA is willing to pay at the level that the elite teams are paying at.
Yeah, it's quite the challenge, right? And he mentioned it. And when we're talking about the goalpost moving, let's just rip the Band-Aid off. You're talking about the rev share and what the value is of these rosters. And I think the Athletic reported, South Florida's roster is between 8 and 10 million. I think that's the accepted highest in this, the wide known highest in this league. And for UTSA to be a fraction of that is, I mean, that is almost unbearable to try to but they you still play them on the field every game. You still have to go out and play, but just the amount of input there. I mean, it feels like season after season, UTSA could be falling further behind in this deal.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't, well, I don't know that there's any reason to believe that. Like, I think that the teams that spend at a level that's high is what they're capable of doing. And the teams that, anybody could go any direction from this baseline. I don't think there's any reason to believe it gets worse from here. But I think yeah, it's not, it's kind of an obvious thing to say, but you're not guaranteed to beat all the teams that you spend more money than, but it certainly helps. It gives you
Right.
a better chance to put a stronger roster out there and you're in more 60-40, 70-30 games rather than 50-50 flipping a coin and hoping you win the close ones, which we've talked about a couple times this year is it's kind of the scenario you put yourself in where the teams like South Florida who are spending in that 8 to 10 million range, according to that report, they're not going to have the tests where they're playing close games
Yeah.
against lesser teams in the conference. And those are the kind of games that UTSA has to survive if their roster is just going to be kind of on par rather than a step above.
Yeah, I just what I meant is just when this topic came up last year, it was like, holy smokes, Memphis is spending $5 million on their roster.
Right, right.
And now this year we're saying, holy smokes, South Florida is spending $8 to $10 million on their roster. What is it going to be next year, right? And what number does UTSA need to try to get to stay in the mix? I think you wrote about this today. Jeff Traylor kind of declined to comment about it because he didn't want to put the number out there because I think he's worried it'll make his program look bad, but it's certainly not going away. And I think that's the part that's maybe the most frustrating to Jeff.
Yeah, and I mean, I understand you're putting a call out to potential big money donors and somebody who could step up and provide 1 or 2 million that would make a huge difference to your roster and to your program. But I think it's easier to lobby that internally for a university to find that extra money versus the outside world to just have somebody step forward, an angel investor or whatever, and do that. And so I think a lot of that comes down to what is UTSA willing to commit as a university and as an athletic program. And to be fair to them, we've already seen huge increases year over year. That their budget number just keeps going up and up and up and up. I write about this every year, and we'll do it again in January. But it's certainly that we've seen some commitment. But to Jeff's point, the moving goalposts is the expectations, and the raising of the bar is the league, where now you have to do better in a tougher environment and even just across the NCAA with the introduction of revenue sharing that there's a larger demand on programs. So the small upticks that we've seen over the years are not sufficient to keep up with the level of programs that UTSA is up against. And so I think a donor could help a lot, but I do think it's a decision that has to be made at the university level from the president on down about how much they want to support athletics.
Yep, and that's something the president and the administration can absolutely do if they choose to go down that path. And we'll
Yeah, I don't
see.
want to. I don't know. I mean, I don't,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stresses on higher ed in the current political climate for any number of reasons. And so there's a lot of people who are going to want whatever money you might contribute to athletics. But I think the argument is that a strong athletics program generates a profit for you over time. And if not immediately, we saw that, how ticket sales and things like that, and even just interest and awareness and enrollment. I don't need to go through the whole spiel of why athletics is important to colleges, but generally speaking, I think that there's an argument to invest there, even though there's a lot of other demands just because of the potential return.
A very high level discussion, probably to your point, a little bit of over our heads for
Right, right.
a post game interview, but definitely a message was sent there, and if it gets received, we'll find out, right? So, Greg, the Roadrunners, absolutely a huge win. I think this changes the outlook for the rest of the season. Before this win, I think you could have spent the last 11 days talking yourself out of bowl eligibility. I think this one squarely puts bowl eligibility right in UTSA's reach. What do you think?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It would be shocking if they didn't make it at this
Yep,
point. I mean, obviously, some of these games are maybe a little bit harder than we thought at the beginning of the season, and we've been saying that ever since Temple popped up, and that became
yep,
much more of a test. But at this point, you still have to feel good about East Carolina and about Army because they're home games, even though East Carolina is looking like a really, really strong
yep.
team. And you have to feel good about going to Charlotte just because Charlotte hasn't been that good. So, if you're asking me for a prediction right now, I would say what is the math there? 7-5 regular season.
Yep.
So, um, and that sort of assumes that maybe you could beat South Florida and maybe you could lose one of those other games. But if you're asking me to go game by game, I would certainly take loss and then 3 wins at the end of the year would be my guess.
Let's take a dabble here on South Florida, a really, really good team. physically dominant defensive front, it seems like. What do you make of the Bulls this season?
Yeah, it's really interesting just to look at all the different aspects of this roster and the areas where they thrive. I think they've been really good in the running game, both offensively and defensively. If there's been anything about defense that they've been prone to, it seems like they have given up some explosives at times this year. But, on offense, they're just going to move the ball so well because Byron Brown at quarterback and what he does both running and passing. And it's fascinating because he's a lot bigger than a typical running quarterback at 6'3", 230 there. So there's going to be some tests just in terms of who you get on him to try to bring him down when he runs and how well that goes for you. So yeah, there's like Jeff has been saying, they have standouts all across the board. That money's been put to good use, and they've shown it with the teams that they've beat going into the swamp and beating Florida. And even though they slipped up there against Memphis, I think that they're still and like having a bye week too, if as if things couldn't get any worse, that now they have an extra week to get ready for UTSA too. So yeah, there's a lot of things that are kind of stacked against the Roadrunners in this one. I think that's why the line is, was it up to 14 now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or is it close to that?
Yeah, yeah,
You just
14.
had it.
Yeah, 14. So I think this is one of those matchups where, it depends which Roadrunner team shows up, right? If it's the one against Tulane, I would not be shocked if we see a one-score game late. And for me, more than winning and losing, it's how this team plays. Do they still continue to trend positively with Owen? Does Owen still look how he looks? Do we see the run game get going? And can they make a few plays defensively here? So that's what I'm looking for this week. Not necessarily an upset win, but just stay competitive there and be close. And I think we could definitely see that in a few nights here.
Well, with the way the North Texas game went, I think there's still a little bit of a burden on them just to prove that they can show up at all on the road against an elite team. If we
Right.
get the first quarter and it's close, then I'll be right there with you because they've shown that they can play a ton of close games against anybody, it feels like. But just that North Texas was such a standout situation that they have to sort of prove that they're not going to repeat that before I will fully believe that they can hang against a team as talented as South Florida in that environment.
Yep, that makes sense, Greg. I think did we hit on everything? I got some notes here. I think we got to
You
most
took
of it.
notes?
Yeah, well, I
Since
would just
when?
it's been a few days. It's been a busy last 10 days for me, so we got a lot of stuff here. No, I think our special teams was okay. I mean, I the penalties, we could dabble on penalties a little bit. Some of those were terrible,
Yeah.
but
I do think there's not like Jeff said this in his interview last week, and I think it's true from what I've seen is whatever the number of penalties is this year compared to last year, it's not the same problem. Where last year
yes,
it felt like they were really
right.
undisciplined. This year it feels like it's just kind of within the course of football that these
Yeah.
things are happening. So
And when
I
I
don't
say
I don't
bad penalties, I meant bad penalties on the refs. The
yeah,
refs.
sure,
And
sure.
yeah.
Right.
No, I think other than that, we're good from a football standpoint. Basketball this week? What do you got on the
Yeah.
Roadrunners?
Yeah, the men's team looks iffy, and I know the women's teams kind of it seems like they're a little banged up entering the year
Yeah.
already. So
Yeah.
might not be a great first month, and then we will see how it looks as they kind of maybe gel and get going. But the women still have high expectations just based on what they did last year, although it's
Right.
going to be a lot of new players. I feel like they kind of have to prove it. And the men, not high expectations
Yeah.
based on what they did last year, and they'll have to prove a lot of people wrong because it seems like they don't deserve high expectations at
Yeah.
this point.
I caught the tail end of the women's exhibition and they looked strong against a lowly opponent. Hey, there's the dog.
Hello,
He's gone. And I
what's his
caught
name?
Timmy the Dalmatian.
Oh,
So, and I caught the full men's exhibition, and that was a struggle. They'll struggle with defense, but hopefully they could get some offense going. So we'll see. We'll see what Austin Clunch does. There is some talent, a brand new men's roster for the most part. So they tip off Wednesday. So we'll be sure to follow up, see how that goes. Greg, you are headed to Tampa, correct?
yeah, you're not going?
I am out this week for
Ah,
Tampa. My work schedule is nuts this week, but I'm in for Charlotte, so we'll circle back after this weekend or this Thursday's game and see where the Roadrunners stand. I think Greg, unless you got anything else, I think that'll wrap it up.
I think it's good. Thank you for doing this. It's always
Yep.
I know we're a couple days late, but it's good to catch up, and then we get a little preview in there too. This worked out.
Yep, it worked out. JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports, Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News. We appreciate everybody watching. Thanks.